London newsagents.
Mayor Sadiq Khan, welcome back to the newsagents. We can't keep you away.
It's good to be back.
You're like a bad smell.
I've got a taste to it now, you see.
Well, I know that's what happens to people.
Yeah.
That's what happens to people. You said before we started, you're like, we're always with the sort of London gags.
Well,
it's like London buses used to be.
Exactly. You wait ages for one to come along, then three come along at the same time. Not anymore, of course.
Not anymore, of course, no. Look, we should start with your book. For those who foolishly haven't had the chance to read it yet, just tell people what it's about and why you managed or wanted to find time in what I imagine is quite a busy schedule to write.
Yeah, so what this is not is a political memoir. What I sought to do 2 Christmases ago, when that Christmas was cancelled because of the hubris of Boris Johnson, the second COVID Christmas, I had some time between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve and spent the time breaking the back of this book. And this book's called Breathe, Tackling the Climate Emergency. And it's my journey in relation to how I became interested in climate change, tackling climate change and air pollution. My journey in relation to being somebody who wasn't really that interested in this and why I'm so passionate about this. But also what I've tried to do is write the book as a useful handbook. What I mean by that is I've broken the book down into 7 chapters and they're the 7 obstacles all of us face when it comes to winning an argument on climate change, air pollution. So it could be, fatalism, there's nothing we can do about it. Apathy, well, it doesn't really apply to me. Cynicism, all you politicians are the same. Deprioritising things, actually something else is much more important than climate change. Hostility, a vocal minority often making a lot of noise and you being scared as a politician to that vocal minority. The costs, it's really important where the jargon is a just transition, and then gridlock. And so they're the 7 obstacles that I've faced over the last 7 years and how I've responded and the outcome.
And I suppose in a way, the genesis of this book is in this segment we like to try and sort of make things a little bit kind of more expansive in terms of politicians' personal experiences. I mean, this was personal to you in the sense that you developed adult asthma as a result of air pollution.
I've been as honest as I can be in the book. When I was a lawyer and I was offered a salaried partnership, what I negotiated wasn't an increase in my salary. It was a car park space for my Saab convertible on the same street as the law firm in the centre of London, which has great public transport. That was my thinking at that time. When Anissa was born, it was right mare getting a car seat in the back of a 2-seater, convertible. So I swapped the Saab convertible for a Land Rover Discovery, 4-wheel drive. I left London, I think, 4 times. Never went off-roading. That was my thinking when I was an MP. And I was so
you got your 4x4 going down Tooting High Street.
Yeah, quite absolutely. Probably went tooting to the office in the centre of the city, and that was most of the mileage that I did. When I was an MP and a minister, I voted for a 3rd runway at Heathrow. The reason why I'm explaining this, and I've explained this in the book, is that was my starting point, Lewis. In relation to I thought climate change was saying over there, global south in 20, 30 years' time to think about. And then, as you've mentioned, in 2014, I ran the London Marathon to raise funds for the Dispossessed Fund, a charity that the Evening Standard are involved in. I had a full medical before I ran the marathon. I ran the marathon. Important to the story, I beat Ed Balls and Andy Burnham. but then a few weeks and a few months later...
Not that
I'm competitive. But then a few weeks and a few months later, I realised when I was playing football and I was sprinting for the ball, I'd be wheezing afterwards. Or when I'd go for a long run, I'd be wheezing afterwards. I'd be regularly coughing. So if I was being interviewed by you in 2014, I'd be clearing my throat a lot. And you'd be noticing that I'm not as clear as otherwise would be. So I eventually went to a GP who diagnosed me with adult onset asthma and explained it's now becoming more and more common because of environmental factors. And so I started looking into what causes asthma, what causes air pollution, is it reversible? And I discovered a number of things. Firstly, the things that cause air pollution also cause climate change. It is reversible. But I discovered the story of this 9-year-old child called Ella Adukisi Deborah, who lives in South London, not very far from me. And Ella, tragically, as a 9-year-old child, lost her life in 2013, was diagnosed 2 years before aged 7. And her mum, who's an amazing, amazing woman, Rosamond, had these questions about why her daughter had died. When her daughter passed, the doctor said, and the death certificate said it was due to asthma. But Rosamond had questions, and she was very fortunate. She met a great expert, Professor Stephen Holgate, She found a great lawyer, Jocelyn Coburn, who used to instantly work with me, and she campaigned for a second inquest. And what Stephen found, much to the surprise of Rosamond, you could draw a graph, Lewis. Every day when Ella's health was bad, when she had an asthma attack, when she was having problems, coincided with traffic outside her home, with high levels of air pollution. And so there was a link between the air pollution and Ella's health. And Ella's case became the first case ever when there was a second inquest which found air pollution as a causal factor for her death.
There's no doubt. I mean, look, you've in many ways made your mayoralty about, or partly about, or attached yourself to the signature issue, and there's no doubt that you have been at the forefront of it by comparison to other cities and other cities, not just in Britain, around the world. But look, we both know your background. Listeners will know your background. Son of a bus driver and so on. You know just how profound the cost of living crisis is for people right now. We're talking on the day where we've seen that although inflation is falling, food price inflation, it's eye-watering. I mean, if you look at the staple prices, bread, eggs, all of the sort of basics up, not just at 20%, but 30, 40, 50%. You know what that's like. You've experienced that. We're both from those sort of families who know what it's like, just how difficult it can be when prices are rising. And yet you as mayor, as a progressive mayor, as a left-of-centre mayor, are imposing a deeply regressive, effectively, tax on Londoners and the poorest Londoners who are likely to have the most polluting vehicles. How do you square that? Because I know you will be concerned about it.
Well, let's unpack the various points you've made in your question. Half of Londoners don't own a car. And what that means is, just like on a macro scale, those least responsible for climate change suffer the worst consequences, global south. On a micro scale, those least responsible for climate change and air pollution in our cities suffer the consequences. So half of Londoners don't own a car. The poorest Londoners are least likely to own a car. So this is an issue of social justice and racial justice. Why do I say that? Social justice because it's the poorest Londoners who are amongst those who died prematurely, 4,000 across our city, across our country, almost 36,000. It's an issue of racial justice because families like Ella's, black families, black, Asian, minority ethnic families live on the main roads where there's the worst polluting air. So it's an issue of racial justice as well. So in 2017, when I embarked on this journey, people were saying, for the reasons you've said, by the way, they're also, things weren't great in 2017. This policy, the polluter pays, is the principle, is unfair. And, there'd be, the skies would fall in. And so what we did was we introduced a scrappage scheme to support those low-income families, charities, small businesses, sole traders, to make the transition. The jargon is just transition. And from 2017, when 39% of vehicles, only 39% of vehicles were compliant, we've gone from 39% of vehicles being compliant to 94% being compliant. Why do I say that? It's relevant to who will have to pay the charge you're rightly concerned about for poorest Londoners. So the good news is, because of our policies, not only have we seen a remarkable transformation in the quality of air, benefiting the poorest Londoners that both you and I care about, but also the number of non-compliant vehicles, brackets, those that pay the charge, closed brackets, has gone from 6 out of 10 to now less than 1 out of 10. So in central and inner London, 94% of vehicles compliant, pay no charge. In outer London, more than 9 out of 10 vehicles are now compliant. So here's the remarkable thing. You speak to experts at Imperial College or others from Great Ormond Street to the Chief Medical Officer to World Health Organization. They've never seen a policy so transformative to air quality, but I've also announced a further £110 million scrappage scheme to support those Londoners who may miss out.
You will know that by extending ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone, to the outer boroughs, where the outer boroughs, as you know, public transport is often less intense, and there are fewer public transport options than there will be in inner London, you will know that inevitably there will be poorer Londoners, and you can say the majority of this, majority of that, but there will be plenty of poorer Londoners who, right at the point where the cost of living crisis, this crisis which, by the way, we thought that by August or September, when these changes are going to be made, perhaps these things would have abated. But it looks like core inflation is embedded in the system, and you're going to make their life harder.
But let's do that. So let's deal just with outer London, which is your question. So in outer London, 2/3 of Londoners who have asthma or respiratory issues live in outer London. So this.
But why not just wait?
Why
not just postpone?
Let me explain.
The change?
Let me explain what. So 2/3 of those with asthma or respiratory issues live in outer London. The 10 boroughs with the highest rates of death linked with asthma, the 10 boroughs are all in outer London. The poorest Londoners, so those who earn less than £10,000 in outer London, 7 out of 10 don't own a car. Those who earn between £10,000 and £20,000, 54% don't own a car. But this point about delay is a really cute point used by politicians unwilling to take action, because here's the thing. If you and I were speaking 20 years ago, there'd be a mainstream group of politicians denying climate change, denying air pollution. They can no longer deny it. What they do now is to seek to delay it. When's the right time to tackle climate change? This is one of the chapters in my book called deprioritising, right? We can't deal with climate change, air pollution, because we've got COVID. The green crap, inverted commas, that George Osborne and David Cameron talked about because of austerity, had we kept, inverted commas, the green crap, we'd be energy secure. The cost of living crisis would be less bad because people's bill would not have gone up as sharply when Putin invaded Ukraine. We're talking about the cost of living crisis. If we had, and if we do, and I'm hoping the next Labour government does, invest in retrofitting people's homes, insulation, double glazing and so forth, bills come down. We invest in wind and solar, bills come down. And the same goes with tackling air pollution. The NHS saves money. Those stuck in congestion are more productive because they're not stuck in congestion, and families live longer lives.
You all know, anybody who's taken, and I want to expand the conversation because lots of our listeners don't live in London, but you will know that if you go into any taxi or cab in London, it doesn't take long.
I tend to use public transport, walk or cycle.
Well, me too, but occasionally when I've saved up, and it doesn't take long before the conversation comes down to you. The charge that is often levelled at you by people who drive cars and people who own taxi cabs and so on. You hate taxi drivers. You hate motorists. What do you say to that?
Let me do the black taxis first. So when I was campaigning to be mayor, the black taxis had a number of demands. By the way, they were never enamoured to Johnson or Livingston. One is what you need to do is to have more taxi cab ranks. Tick, done that. Massive expansion. 2, you've got to allow us to drive in bus lanes. Done that. 3, you've got to have marshals that take action against the private minicabs who are breaking the rules. Done that. 4, which is really, really, really bold, take action against Uber.
But they seem to loathe you.
Hold on a sec.
Why is that? I'm just intrigued. I'm just wintrigued why you think that is, because it's so visceral.
So you have to ask the black taxi drivers, but I'm in good company because I can't think of a politician that they love. But here's the point. There comes a stage where you've got to provide leadership, not followership. And, with respect to the black taxi drivers, they're not my sole concern, but I'm not anti-car. It's really important to say I'm anti-air pollution, anti-climate change. So this policy helps the black taxis. Why does it help the black taxis? Why does it help the drivers? Because one of the big causes of lack of productivity is cars stuck in traffic. The average driver who drives regularly is stuck in traffic every year more than 144 hours. That's 7 days a year. By freeing up the roads, those who shouldn't be on the roads, who can have alternatives, it frees up the roads for the electrician, the plumber, the taxi driver and so forth. It costs our economy £1.5 billion a year in congestion because of the lack of productivity.
How are you feeling about the election next year? I mean, you're trying to do something unprecedented. Third term, Boris Johnson didn't stand. Ken Livingstone tried several times, but he never achieved the third term. Latest poll says 50% of Londoners think you're not doing a good job. And how are you feeling about it? Also, we've also got the electoral changes, which many people may not have clocked, right? So it's going to be first past the post for the first time. That changes the game. And we've seen what happened with ID. Are you concerned about that, voter ID?
Yes, it's the most important poll is the election day, and that's the most important focus group is the campaigning you do in the lead up to the election. But of course, I'm concerned about the government moving the goalpost to try and make it easier to win.
Do you think they did that with first past the post?
Without a doubt, you speak to those close to Priti Patel, who was the Home Secretary, obsessed with having a Tory back running London. They ran London for 8 years.
Just explain to people. So before, all the mayoral systems used used the alternative vote, which meant that people gave their first and second preference, and that meant if no one got a majority, then their people's second preferences would be reallocated.
So you had to get more than 50%.
You have to get more than 50%.
So the thinking behind the Tory move is, Labour and Tory are probably first and second. So the second preferences of the Lib Dems and the Greens are quite important because it's very unlikely any candidate will get more than 50% on the first round of voting. So you vote for a number one and then a number two.
And now it's going to be first past the post.
Exactly. So the thinking behind the Tories, ostensibly, using a different context, gerrymandering, is because if you're voting Lib Dems or Greens, and in the last 24 years, Labour or Tory have come first or second, except when Ken was an independent. The thinking behind the Tories changing the electoral system is those Lib Dems who give me the second preference, or the Greens who give me the second preference, will not be able to do so. And so that's why I say moving the goalpost. And the second thing you mentioned is photo ID. So 2.5 million Londoners don't have a driving licence. 500,000 Londoners don't have a passport. Many of them have limited means and will not be able to get the photo ID, and many of them may live, lives where they're transient, moving around and stuff. So the thesis is the government's doing these things to make it easier to win the election. But here's the thing about...
So they're trying to rig your election, the other mayoral elections.
Listen, we've seen with photo ID, evidence of Conservatives here speaking to Republicans in the USA to find tricks to stay in power. And this is just another trick they're trying to pull. But I think Londoners are smarter than that, and I'm hoping over the next 11, 12 months, I persuade enough Londoners to lend me the vote again in 2024.
Let's imagine you get that third term. And let's imagine, if the current polls are right, that there's a Labour government at some point in 2024, early 2025. And let's look forward to the end of your third term. And that will roughly coincide with the end of that first Labour term. What would you expect, and what would you be asking for in terms of new powers, new changes? Because this will be a unique term for you. You've always had to work with Conservative governments. This time you'd be working with a Labour government and a Labour Prime Minister. How do you think that would change the game? And what would you expect to get from that government?
Well, the most important change would be stability and certainty. Ken had 2 Prime Ministers, Boris had 2 Prime Ministers, I've had 5 and counting, right? That's really important.
Counting. That's still time.
That's quite... Let's see. Yeah, exactly. That's the first thing. Second thing is, we're trying to lobby the Labour team to, when they win the election, one of the first things they do is give power away, to devolve powers and resources to Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, to West Midlands, Andy Street, a Tory mayor, Tees Valley's Ben Houchin, Tracy Brabin in West Yorkshire, and of course to London as well. That devolution of powers is really important. So I'll give you an example. In London, we get to spend 7% of taxes raised in London, New York 50%, Tokyo 70%. That devolution of powers is really important, and resources. That means, for example, we can address some of the crises we face, whether it's the housing crisis, building more genuine affordable homes. We've already started building more council homes than any time since the 70s, more completions of homes, more time than any time since the 30s. We need to do much, much, much more. On air quality, you mentioned some of the challenges with the government not supporting us with the clean air zones in London. The government would hopefully support us in relation to tackling climate change and air pollution. One of the 5 missions is around the net zero economy, and Ed Miliband's
taking back
plans
empty
for a brand new
properties.
deal.
You talked about that.
Well, listen, we've got a situation in London where we know, according to experts, we need to be building, roughly speaking, 50,000 homes a year. When Johnson was a mayor, we were building 25,000. We're now up to 35,000. There's still a big gap between supply and demand, and you've got these empty properties where even now, David Cameron first promised this in 2016. We're not fully aware who owns these properties, but they're left empty.
I'm really interested in, earlier on you were talking about the importance of leading and leadership, and of being brave and not delaying and being clear. And whether people like you or they don't like you, and we talked about those polls and whatever, it's very clear, you've made some unpopular or controversial decisions because you think it's right. You could argue that rather contrasts with the approach that the current National Labour Party leadership is taking, right? That is, okay, they're far ahead in the polls. People use the analogy of the Ming vase. Don't break it, don't smash it. But they're being Keir Starmer's cautious. Very cautious. He doesn't want to really say what he's going to do. He doesn't want to potentially frighten the horses. Do you think he should be a bit braver? Follow your example.
I've known Keir for more than 25 years. I used to work together. I used to brief him quite a bit. And Keir is a leader that I trust. I think he's getting his strategy and tactics right. Why do I say that? The general election, you said earlier on, could be 2025. It's a long way off. It's a long way off. 18 months, according to most pundits. And so the issue is timing. The issue is to make sure that you peak at the right time, and that's in the lead up to the short campaign. And the 3 steps of the process that Keir's embarked on, he's already achieved the first 2. The first step was to sort the Labour Party out, address the issues of anti-Semitism and so forth. The second step was to be an effective opposition. He's now in his 2nd or 3rd Prime Minister, I'm not sure which one, to make sure the public knows what the Tories are about and to hold them to account. Tick. The third step is what you're alluding to, which is the positive vision for our country. And he set out, the 5 missions, and over the course of the next 18 months, you will see more detail of the jargon we use as politicians is the retail offer. So Tony Blair's pledge card came quite late in the day. It came quite late in advance of May 1990.
I suppose it does that caution speak to the kind of moment that we're in? Do you feel like Britain is a country in decline right now?
I think we are. in relation to just look at what.
And do you think London's in decline?
Look at the economy. Look at culturally. Look at socially in relation to whether you use GDP, whether you use inflation. You mentioned whether it's you look at inward investment and so forth. I think the country is in decline.
Do you think London's in decline?
No, I think London has bounced back faster from the pandemic than any other global city. Foreign direct investment in London is up. You will see this summer amazing events in London to attract more people.
But the effect, you know what I'm getting at.
Sporting capital of the world, we're the cultural capital of the world.
I mean, Brexit has had a profound effect in London, hasn't it? And you've talked about that many times before. I mean, how long do you think? I mean, we asked you about this when you were last in the newsagent studio, but even since then, I mean, you'll have seen the polling out this week saying that 62% of the public now think Brexit was a bad idea. Now, you've been the most vocal senior Labour Party politician to talk about this. But how long do you think it can be that if that polling sustains and indeed perhaps intensifies, do you think that eventually that does have a gravitational pull on our politics?
I think the problem is referendums tend to be once in a generation, and that makes it very difficult for you to have a serious conversation about rejoining the EU in the short term. You got to respect the results. You may not like it, and I hate it. And so you've got to try and make
it. You hate what happened.
Of course I do. Listen, I've had neighbours, friends, and colleagues who are Londoners, originally from Italy or Spain or Poland, who are heartbroken. They feel like they're not wanted here. They feel like they're foreigners. They're Londoners. Their kids are born in this city. I hate what it's done to them. I hate what it's done to the reputation of our country. But I respect the result. I hate, by the way, when Liverpool lose, but I accept that Liverpool lose sometimes. And so the point is this: we've got to make the best of this. And that means the opposite of an extreme hard Brexit. So I do believe we should talk about rejoining the single market. You can be a member of the single market outside the European Union, by the way. If you look at the number of scenarios, being a member of the single market, being a member of the customs union, being a member of one or the other or both, closer alignment, all these things are far better for us economically and I think socially and culturally than what we have now, which is an extreme hard Brexit.
Thinking about the mayoral election next year, there has been a few whispers, rumours that Jeremy Corbyn could stand. What would you think about that? Would you welcome him joining the race as an independent, perhaps?
I think the more the merrier. I think, but more
the merrier.
Listen, I think the joy of a democracy and the joy of pluralism is having a debate and an argument. And a discussion, and the best person, wins that and stuff, and that's one of the joys of, our system.
You'd beat him though.
Well, it's not a question of me beating him. It's a question of having the debate and the discussion. One of the things I've tried to do, which is hard for me, because of just the way I'm wired, is to not be as pugilistic as I normally am. I tend to be tribal, right?
And you think you've changed in that way?
I've tried to. I've really tried. And the book is all about how the way you deal with cynicism is by coalition building, by reaching across, by trying to build bridges, by trying to understand the other point of view. So on climate change, I think John Gummer, somebody as a teenager, I hated Margaret Thatcher, her cabinet, what they did, and John Gummer was a big part of that. I think he's an amazing campaigner. What he's done on the Climate Change Committee and as Lord Deben. Chris Skidmore, another Tory who's just, Chris Skidmore's the guy that nominated Liz Truss. And I actually parked that for a second. Some of the stuff he's talking about and saying is incredibly brave. In the Green Party, Sean Berry and Jenny Jones and so forth. And so I think you've got to reach across more. And I think had I continued to be a parliamentarian, the sort of nature of Parliament makes that more difficult.
Do you ever fancy going back into Parliament?
No.
Never?
No.
You rule out. You could never see circumstances in which you'd go back into.
If the ball comes
politics.
loose at the end of the box, I will pass it sideways to Keir or somebody else.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Look, I think
you don't fancy it anymore. Just
a number of things. One of the things about being in Parliament, and I listen, I wasn't just a minister; I was a whip, and so I understand.
Because people might forget. I mean, you really do go back quite a long way. To the last Labour government, you were a minister.
I was in Gordon's cabinet. Yeah, it's great. So look, I mean, I was an MP for 11 years, and it was I was in the cabinet or shadow cabinet for 6 of those years. I was a minister or shadow minister for many years, and I had the pleasure of being part of Gordon's cabinet. But there's a quote from an American mayor who said, and I'm paraphrasing, if the 19th century was about empire, and the 20th century about nation states, the 21st century is about cities and mayors. And I think here's where the action is. And one of the things that I try and say in the book is actually where the doers, whether it's New York or Paris or Barcelona or Dhaka or Freetown or London or Manchester or Liverpool or Birmingham, we're the doers across Democrats, Republicans, Labour, Tories. And I think governments, whether it's prime ministers, presidents or parliaments, they're the delayers.
I wonder if what you talk about, you're sort of changing, your political personality changing, you're becoming a bit less pugilistic, you're wanting to reach across more. is partly as a result of your own experience of the sort of raw end of politics. I mean, you've spoken about potentially of having a sort of form of PTSD as a result of the death threats that you've had and so on. Do you think that's the case? And just tell people maybe about that change and what you went through.
One of the things I realised is actually we often do stuff without realising it makes us well. So you may not realise, but you walk into work, good exercise, right? Or you go out with your mates, good for your mental health, or other things that you do. And so when you stop doing them, you realise that you need to do them. And I discovered a lot of that during the pandemic. But over the last few years, we've suffered in the last 7 years I've been mayor. The awful Grenfell Tower tragedy. I went to so many funerals. 72 people's lives perished. I went to Christian funerals, Muslim funerals, secular funerals. I've still spent so much time with those families. We had 4 terror attacks in 2017. Again, going to funerals and services of those who passed away, both as an MP and as a mayor. I often meet bereaved families who died because of violent crime within the pandemic. In amongst all that, we had Donald Trump and his stuff on social media and some of the stuff he said about me, and then people.
To be clear, he harangued you repeatedly.
Yeah.
He sort of constant kind of war of words.
Yeah,
on Twitter.
but independent experts have analysed that whenever he had a pop at me, there was a massive spike in hatred towards me on social media and in real life.
You got death threats.
Death threats, yeah. Without going into details, I've got a huge amount of protection and so forth. You've got terrorists around the world who, pray me in aid for the stuff they do and so forth. And it has a toll.
To live with?
Well, it has its toll. I mean, listen, I'm quite stoic and I can deal with these things. But you firstly, you realise actually you're not dealing with it. You think you are, but you're not. Secondly, it has an impact on people you love and care about, because you may be as stoic as you like as a journalist, but when your mum reads a nasty thing about you, it affects your mum and upsets you as a consequence, right?
I'll hear about it, believe me.
Yeah, by the way, you've got a great garden.
Oh well, thank you very much.
But here's the point.
This is why he's mayor.
And so it does impact you, right, in relation to these things. And I worry, Lewis. Our gender, our sex doesn't talk about these things. It's macho. It's alpha male. I can imagine a former me training in my boxing gym with my brother and the coaches saying, "Listen, I've got a bit of mental ill health today. What have happened?" But now people are talking about it, and because hopefully people like me, people like Alistair Campbell, Prince Harry, Prince William, many others are talking about mental health, and we should encourage that.
Was there a moment when you realised that this was deeply affecting you? You talked about the PTSD. Was there a moment?
During the pandemic, I really felt low during the pandemic, and actually Alistair was a big source of help during the pandemic, and many others. And the way I phrase it is I lost my mojo. What I mean by that is, not shaving unless I had to. I was doing media broadcast, wearing jogging bottoms during the course of the day. I'd wear a white shirt because obviously in the Zoom meetings you want to look a bit smart and stuff. But what I realised is, although I try and inspire my staff and my team, they inspire me. So you get something back from you come into work, you get something back. You having a conversation on the tube, you get something back. But also, not getting that back and having still the sort of stuff being thrown at you means you've not got the usual defensive mechanisms you have, which is discussing things with your team, talking things through and so forth. And and so what I do now is I do things to keep myself physically fit, exercise and so forth, and mentally fit. And that means the phrase is talking therapy. So I talk to somebody who's a doctor while playing tennis. So you kill two birds, but also it means I'm keeping myself physically fit and mentally fit. And I give this advice to not just you because you're very busy, but anybody. You may think you're okay, and that's great, but just check that you'll continue to do the stuff that keeps you okay, whether it's mental fitness or physical fitness.
Do you, Trump could come back? You're someone. He was sort of quasi obsessed with you. When you look at what's going on in the States at the moment, what do you think? What do you think about America's
I'm not sure
right now?
what's art and what's reality. Those of us that watch Succession, it's just a remark. And listen, I think of course he would come back. I'd make this point. One of the tweets Trump said against me was with a hashtag. This is his tweet saying hashtag Stone Cold Loser. Well, I won my re-election.
He wants to be the first to come back since Grover Cleveland.
Well, let's see if he's not charged in all the rest of it and stuff and behind bars and stuff. But listen, but again, that's for the Americans to decide, right? And I think what I'd say to the Democrats is, and this is the point, I said sort of I was teasing in response to your teasing me about other candidates standing in the mayoral election. Well, listen, the rules of the game are you can stand, other people can stand, and your job is to beat that person, fairly and squarely. And the challenge for the Democrats is going to be and I'm sure President Biden's ready for this, if Trump is the Republican candidate, that they have a response to that.
Just finally, I mean, I talked about your longevity. I mean, you are, I don't want to call you a veteran because that's the sort of kiss of death, being called a veteran. But, you have seen a lot of politics come and go since you were in Parliament. And you've seen a lot of prime ministers come and go. What are your impressions about leadership? What have you learned about leadership during that time? I mean, watching those, what's it, 5 prime ministers now? Watching them up close, because you obviously in Cobra meetings and things like that, particularly during the pandemic and before and since, you saw them up close. What are your impressions of them? What have you learned, or what have you changed your view about politics from
One of the
watching
things
them in that time?
I mentor a lot of people. I'm of that age now where I mentor a lot of people, and I always ask people, ask yourself the question: why are you running for this? Why are you running to be a councillor? Why are you running to be an MP? Why are you running to be the leader of your party, or running to be mayor? And I think a lot of these prime ministers, didn't think through why they wanted to be the prime minister. Cameron, he thought he'd be good at it, not because he wanted to improve the country or whatever. Theresa May. I spent a lot of time with Theresa May, and I kid you not, I haven't got a clue what she stands for or what she believes in. Boris Johnson, there were meetings I'd have with Theresa May where, like, that's 5 second silence, right? That's hard. Where for 2 minutes, I try and play chicken in my head. So let's see who speaks first. She won't speak. And so
why? Because
she was. I mean, I think that 2017 election, was quite traumatic for her, and I think basically, she never bounced back from that. And Gavin
traumatized
Ball, well, Gavin Ball was was the person doing the work in Number 10 when I was there. Huge respect for Gavin Ball being the chief of staff and what he managed to do with Theresa May. Kept going for 2 years. Boris Johnson is somebody who wanted to be king of the world, and became king of the world, or the prime minister, and then we saw how that movie ended, and it's still ongoing. Liz Truss, of course, the 49T.
What was he like, Johnson, in the Cobra meetings during the pandemic? What was he like?
So during the early days of pandemic, Dominic Cummings knew his stuff. Johnson didn't. What's fascinating about that was we'd done a lot of work in London because I was speaking to mayors around the world. So the mayor of Milan, the mayor of Seoul, because I went to the Far East first, East and Southeast Asia first. I went to Italy next, and then when I first met Johnson and Cummings privately, it was quite clear we knew more than they did about what happened in South Korea, what happened in Italy, and I just beg to believe, because they've got the Foreign Office at their disposal. They got and they knew nothing about what's going on. Simple things like when I explained to them that actually we'd have to go into think about lockdown. Other cities around the world were doing this, and I explained to Johnson, listen, you're a civil libertarian, I'm a human rights lawyer. If both of us are both saying the importance of lockdown, that'll cut through. That'll even people understand it must be serious if we're both saying we're curtailing people's human rights and civil liberties. But he just wasn't. He hadn't engaged in these. Cummings, to be fair to Cummings, had been thinking these things through, and you could tell. I mean, honestly, if you were a Martian in that room, you'd think Cummings was the Prime Minister, not Johnson.
I mean, that must have been pretty troubling at the time.
Absolutely, and so I was imploring Johnson, and this will come out during the inquiry, to take action, to go into lockdown. In advance of lockdown, I'd encourage people to, not travel on public transport, taking a huge risk. In advance of lockdown, we'd cancel St Patrick's Day and the London Marathon. In advance of lockdown, I'd stop shaking hands, even though this guy was, bragging about his virility by shaking hands and so forth.
Do you think that he was of all the prime ministers you've seen, he was the sort of worst one that we could have had at that moment? Without
a doubt. I think, not just because of him having to deal with a pandemic. A pandemic is a serious thing. You want a serious leader who does detail. Maybe in a different environment, Johnson would have been, less damaging. I genuinely think, not just the lack of preparation, but I genuinely think that in relation to, and I'm very careful what I say because of the public inquiry, but I think fewer people may have died had we had a different Prime Minister.
I mean, briefly, Truss was barely there at all, so I'm not sure if you really saw much of her up close. But Sunak, I mean, what are your impressions of him? I mean, he's a completely different character to Johnson. I mean, now you've got this working relationship, you will have him with him for at least the next 12 months or so. What are your impressions of him as Prime Minister?
Well, firstly, I'm incredibly proud that we've got an Asian Prime Minister.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, that must have
it's a huge source of pride to me.
Yeah.
We have, a Hindu Prime Minister of Asian origin.
From the Conservative Party.
Even I see why that's important, because it shows we're not one homogenous blob, right? We are diverse within, ethnic origin, and so forth. So that to me is a source of pride. Parking all the knockabout stuff. It's sort of, as indeed Hamza becoming First Minister in Scotland. Also great about Hamza, he's SNP. So it just shows how diverse we are. You can be SNP, you can be Labour, you can be Tory. It just shows, our diversity.
Bet your mum and dad wouldn't have thought that day.
I think when my dad first came here, and my mum and dad first came here, they were presented with signs saying, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. By no blacks, it was anybody of colour. Their boy is the Mayor of London, and Rishi is the Prime Minister, and Hamza is the First Minister, and Anas is the Labour Party. But here's the thing about Sunak is not put aside that he looks like a supply teacher, he behaves like a supply teacher, not investing in relation to the children's education. Look, I love teachers. I've got family members who are teachers. The criticism of supply teachers is because by nature of the fact they're in there for a day, right? They're just trading water, aren't they? And I think Sunak's not thought through why he wanted to be Prime Minister, what he wants to do, and he's weak. He is weak. You just see this week we're having this conversation with Swala Braverman. What's Sunak's view on Swala Braverman? Nobody knows. Because he's weak to have a view, because he's waiting to see which way his backbenchers go, and what people are saying, what his whips are advising. Look at Johnson. You'd have thought Sunak could have a view on Johnson in relation to. Let's be clear. The Cabinet Office have referred papers to 2 police forces because of what they saw in Johnson's diary. What's the Prime Minister's view on that? Bearing in mind 3 words he used when he stood on the doors of Downing Street, and he's weak. And this sort of stuff comes from the top. Whether it's Johnson partying that affects the ethos of those in Number 10, those across government, or Sunak being weak and us being rudderless. And I tell you this, if you are thinking about investing in the UK, if you're thinking about doing business in the UK, you're worried about this weak leadership because you're not sure if they're going to change their policies or what they're going to do. And that's one of the reasons why I think, bring on a general election, because I think the British public should have a choice of a fresh start, and in my view, that should be Keir Starmer.
And his government employs Suella Braverman. And he has Suella Braverman as his Home Secretary, and Home Secretary talks about an invasion of people. I mean, in one sense, you've just talked about it, you've referenced it, we've got this British Asian Prime Minister, we've taken an enormous step forward. And yet it feels to me, I don't know how it feels to you, as if the rhetoric that characterises politics has gone backwards. How do you feel about that when you hear phrases like that from the Home Secretary?
I think a number of things happened in around 2015, 2016. Which is a mainstreaming and a normalising of stuff I thought had been gone forever. I'm not just talking about the fact that I thought the P word, the N word, the Y word were gone from use in the English language in this country. It's now come back. People are using it, but also the use of words like invasion when it comes to immigration, asylum seekers, refugees, from people who should know better, not just from personal experience, but from being mainstream politicians. And I think you'll be really careful with language. Look, I'm somebody, and I say this with real experience, who has police officers protecting me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because of the use of words leading to others acting those words, right? So words matter, and use of words matter. You saw in Knowsley what was happening outside the hotel where asylum seekers fleeing persecution were being housed, police vans being firebombed and so forth. You've seen the increase in race attacks in this country. I think words do matter. And by the way, those sorts of words, if you go back in history, they're not usually words used by mainstream political parties. They're used by peripheral parties. And I think we should all be careful about use of language. And if you're in a position of power and influence and have the medium of the media or the floor of the House of Commons, be very careful how you use that.
Finally, how would you like to be remembered? End of the 3rd term, 4th term, I don't know. But how, when we look back on the Sadiq Khan, this man, this son of a bus driver, Europe's first Muslim mayor.
I think being remembered, or the L word, the legacy word, is what you talk about towards the end of your career. I'm just getting going, Lewis.
Well, it's your first book, so who knows? I mean, you could end up on the literary festivals. You could end up as an author.
Well, yeah. I mean, listen. I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Writing a book when you've been through
It is
It's
hard.
I mean, I didn't realize how hard it was, and I was lucky.
Thankless.
Well, it was the hubris of Johnson, which meant the second Christmas in COVID was cancelled, which gave me the chance to break the back of the
In your tracksuit
book.
bottoms.
Yeah, quite. Yeah. But it's it's I love being the mayor. It's a privilege. This city gave my family everything, and the phrase that I use is the London promise. You work hard, you got a helping hand, you can achieve anything. And what I want to do, as long as I've got the privilege of being mayor, is to give more people that helping hand.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London. Thank you very much.
Nice
Thanks
talking
for
to you.
coming back. We'll see you next week.
It's a date.
It's a fourth presenter.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.